What have you found to be like the things you hear over and over and over again that you've heard that have consistently just destroyed marriages and relationships outside of like the blatantly obvious things?
I think a big piece is just losing what I called like the cheerleader thing. There's a time when you're first in a relationship where like you're just in this person's corner, like you just the things they do, you're just a fan, like even the things that might be a little annoying or something, like they become sort of like charming things about the person, like you kind of overlook the bad and you look at the at the bright side of everything with that person. And then it's become very in vogue in our culture, I think largely because of media. Every TV show, like you got the wife who's rolling her eyes at the stupid husband, and the husband who like secretly can't stand his wife and she's just like this awful woman who doesn't sleep with him anymore. And all those tropes that make like the Married with Children or any of those, sitcoms. And then I think people think that's how marriages are supposed to be and how people are supposed to relate to their spouse. But I don't think successful marriages look like that. Like successful marriages, they're cheering for each other. Like they're in each other's corner. There's a loyalty to each other. There's a like a. I'm not saying you ignore bad things happening or bad choices that your spouse is making. I don't think that's healthy for your spouse. If you love someone, it's good to help them see their blind spots. But that can be done in a way that I think is loving, right? And affirms that you're a fan of this person. Look, constructive criticism is criticism. Like it's got a bow on it. It's constructive, It's not, hey, you suck. It's, hey, what you're doing sucks. But it's still hard to hear, So there's ways I think to move forward with change or suggest change in your partner that aren't criticisms. Because I think that's the biggest like subtle divisive thing that pushes people towards those big, as you put it, like the big marriage killers, the big obvious reasons why marriages end. I also think, you know, romance, sex, intimacy. And when I say intimacy, intimacy doesn't mean sex necessarily, although sex can be, something that facilitates intimacy. Intimacy is the ability to be yourself with another person, to be fully yourself with another person. And so I think that's something that we build and value and cherish early in a relationship. And then later, as things move along, we're just sort of like, meh, I don't need to talk about that right now. Like, why upset the apple cart? And I don't think that's good. Like, there's never a good time to have tough conversations or to say something to your partner, that makes you feel vulnerable to say. But I think that if you don't, the walls that start getting built between people, it gets to a place where like you can't see over those walls anymore. You can't break through those walls anymore because you've slowly built them brick by brick by brick and reinforced them. And all of a sudden you're like, hey, how come I can't feel this person's warmth anymore? And it's like, dude, because you built this wall over time, one brick at a time. And now it's so damn big, you can't break through it. You can't get around it. You can't feel or hear each other through it. And so I really think it's about the little things, like keeping those little connections. Or if you're in a new relationship, like just not letting there be slippage, just really like making a conscious practice of valuing the connection you have.
I'd love to know your opinion on love. A, because I think I heard you say that just because you love somebody doesn't necessarily mean the marriage is going to be great, or something to that effect, or love doesn't necessarily equal.
Well, there's a lot of people I love I wouldn't want to be married to. And I think that love and marriage, it's nice when they happen to intersect, but I don't think they have a whole lot to do with each other necessarily.
That's what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, they should. I just don't. I think they're correlated. They're definitely not causal. Like, I don't think being married to someone makes you love them. And I don't think loving someone makes you marry them. Because I know people that love each other that aren't married, and I know people that are married that don't love each other in abundance. I know a lot of them. So I think you're making a mistake by associating those two things with each other too closely. But I think love is everything. Like I don't, I mean, I know it sounds like an oversimplification, but I think, John Lennon was onto something. Like all you need is love. Like, I think at the end of the day, we're here because of love. Like, we're here trying to find love and feel love and give love. And most people, if you ask them about their lives, like, what's important, I was a hospice volunteer for many years. And at the end of people's lives, I spent a lot of time in the room with people who were actively dying. And most people, when they're talking to a hospice volunteer, who you only get to meet because you're dying, they don't talk that much about the petty grievances they have with people from their life. They talk about their families. They talk about the things they loved doing, the places they loved going, the memories of moments they loved, that where they felt alive or where they saw something or ate something beautiful that made them feel alive. Like, love is what we're here for. I really believe that. I think being a divorce lawyer has not beat the romantic out of me. I think love is incredible, but I think there's something really, really toxic about not being a realist. Like, I think you can be a romantic and be a realist. I think you can be a romantic and I think it's actually more romantic to be real and honest and to say, like, no one gives you their love permanently. It is loaned to you. And I think marriage creates this false perception that your love has now been permanently gifted to another person. And it makes it really easy to just not care for it anymore. Because, well, it's mine now. No one can take it away. It's mine. But it's not. It's always on loan. Your life is on loan. Your body is on loan. It's ending. Everything is ending all the time. Like, your life is ending 1 minute at a time. From the minute you're born, we are born into a grave. Like, we are on our way out. And I think we should proceed accordingly. Like, I think if you look at your marriage and you remember it's going to end in death or divorce, but it is going to end, I think you're going to approach it differently. So I really do think that love is what we're after. Marriage is not what we're after. If you're after marriage, then maybe, I don't know, it's a financial thing or it's a transactional thing. But even that, why are you after it? Because you want security and you want to feel like someone's there for you. Okay, so marriage may not be the solution to that problem. Like, there's plenty of bad marriages where people don't feel secure. They don't feel like they have support in their life. So I think it's, what is the problem to which marriage is a solution? And if it's the problem of I don't feel loved, there is not a piece of paper that the government can give you that's going to make you feel loved. Or if it does, it's an illusion. It's a imaginary solution to a real problem.
Staying on this theme, people question often, like, I don't know if I am actually in love with this person or I love this person. I don't know if he loves me. I don't know if she loves me. I mean, I guess just based on what you just shared and then also your experience, like, what are some ways that you think people can know if they actually truly like love somebody and how they can tell if their partner actually loves them?
Well, I would say there's two distinct meanings, right? So, like, love is a feeling and love is a verb. So love is a feeling. Like, I love this person and I feel loved by this person. Like, that's a feeling. And then love is also a verb. Like, I'm going to love this person. Like, I'm going to hold on to the possibility of good in them. I'm going to support them emotionally and spiritually. Like, love is a verb. Like, I'm going to do the work to be a good partner to this person. I'm going to, that's so I think that you should ask yourself, like, one is a feeling, like an emotional state, and emotional states are like clouds, like they pass, they change, and you're not going to 100% of the time be in this like ultra charged state. Like, I think that's unrealistic, like those early days of romance, when you first start seeing someone and like just they brush up against you and it's like electric, like we'd never get anything done if it was like that forever. If 10 years in you were still like, oh, when they even walk past, you're like, that's an unrealistic, like, you'd never go to work, you'd never get anything done. So I think it's okay to be honest with yourself that, like, hey, it's going to shift, it's going to change. There's going to be chapters in the relationship where the visceral feeling of love is abundantly clear. Maybe it'll be when a kid is born or an anniversary or when you guys are sharing space in some place that's special to you or when you're having sex or whatever. Like there might be times where you feel that thing intensely and there might be times where it feels further away. But it doesn't mean it's gone. It just means it feels further away. And that's where the verb of love, I think, comes in, which is what can I do that makes this person feel loved? And what does this person do that makes me feel loved? And how can I get them to do that more often? And sometimes I think the answer is when you love someone in the verb sense of the word, they very often then feel inspired to love you back, right? So, I think that's a huge piece is there's this spiral that sometimes happens in long-term relationships. And it doesn't even have to be a love relationship. It can be an employer and an employee is a great, less emotional example, where, well, I'm not going to pay this person well because they're not really doing their job that diligently. Well, I'm not going to do my job diligently. They're hardly paying me well enough, and it's like, okay, so now we're just in this death spiral, where everyone's unhappy with everybody. Same thing in relationships. Like, this person doesn't value me, so I'm not going to treat them with value. Well, why should I treat them with value? They don't treat me with value. Somebody's got to break that cycle. And sometimes and I'm not saying you should keep, trying to push the boulder up the hill. If you're giving and giving and giving and the other person just never gives back, maybe that's a sign that this is not good, right? This is not a good pairing. But a lot of times, like when we show kindness, the other person starts to show kindness and all of a sudden this spiral goes in the other direction. And so I think that's I think the most important question for people to ask themselves is when do I feel loved and when do I feel loving? A lot of this is just inside, like everything's in your head to some degree, everything you're feeling, it's all in your own head. So I think the more you go inside and figure out your emotional state and when you feel loved and when you feel loving, that's where you're really going to do the best work. And then I think you bring that to the relationship. And that's probably what keeps people out of my office is if they can do that.
How does somebody know that the person they're in a relationship with, that they feel that they're loved and that they love this person? How do they know that it's actually a good idea to get married?
Well, that's a totally different question. So you can feel loved and it's not a good idea to get married, or you can love this person. It's not a good idea. So getting married is a very specific legal status, right? And so I think there's two answers to your question. One is, why are you getting married? Like, why are you getting the government involved? Is it religious, that you have some religious belief that, in your faith that marriage is necessary? Because there's lots of faiths, that marriage is a necessary component to sex or to reproduction. There's societal pressure, So why are you getting married? Like, is it a combination? Is it because your mom and dad want you to get married? Like think about why you're getting married. What do you think it's going to have? What impact do you think it's going to have on the relationship? We all know people that they're like, oh, we're getting married. You're like, why are they getting married? Like they have the most toxic relationship. And if you talk to the person, sometimes their answer is just bat. Like you'll say to them, like, what? Well, I feel like if we get married, he'll stop drinking so much. Like what in God's name would make you think that's the case? Like really? Like what is there any data to support that conclusion? Like where is that coming from? So, I think asking the question, why am I getting married? Because I think your life should be by design rather than default. And it just shouldn't be, well, this is what you do. Why? Well, I don't know, because this is what you do. Okay. That's not a great answer, So I think that's a big piece. And then I also think if we're not talking about just marriage from a legal standpoint, if what you're saying is this a person I should have like a long-term pair bond with? I think that's about what do I bring out in this person and what do they bring out in me? And look, I think sometimes it's really easy to mistake deep, passionate physical connection for a great pair bond. But at the end of the day, like think about what does it mean to be in a long-term relationship with someone? This person's going to be your roommate. They're going to be your financial partner. They're going to be your vacation partner a lot of the time. They're going to be your sexual partner. I mean, that's the difference between a roommate and a spouse or a romantic, cohabitation, right, is that you're sleeping together or having some romantic sexual component. So I don't think it's bad to say like, hey, this is also about sex, because otherwise we'd just be friends who live together, right? So I think asking yourself, how is this person in those categories is a good one. And I'm not suggesting, by the way, that they have to be perfect in a perfect 10 in all of those. It's got to be the best sex I ever had, got to be the best roommate ever. We have to have the exact same religious beliefs. We have to have the exact same habits on a daily basis. Both a morning person or both a night person, both dog people or both cat people. I think that's an insane fallacy to think that to have a good, successful marriage, because sometimes polarity is actually why people have great couplings, like one person, like is yin and the other one's yang on certain things. But I think there are some things that are like disconnects. Like having a person who's very disciplined with a person who's very spontaneous, sometimes that can be really helpful because they'll balance each other out. But a person who's like very much chaotic and the other person is meticulously, fastidiously disciplined, that might attract them to each other, but man, long term, they might make each other absolutely insane, and really like the things that draw people to each other are sometimes the things that repel them from each other long term. So I think having an honest conversation about, okay, yeah, I love this person. Yeah, I love sleeping with this person, but are we compatible long term? Do we both want the same things? Do we envision the same kind of life? Does one of us want a very quiet, sedate life at home and the other one wants to travel the world? Does one of us want kids and the other one's like, oh my God, I definitely do not want kids? Have those discussions. Just because you feel this deep emotional connection with this person, I'm a realist. Again, I'm a romantic, but I'm a realist. Let's talk honestly about what marriage is. It is living with someone most of the time. It is having this person be your primary relationship most of the time. That we got to call that out for what it is in an honest way. That's, we're bad at it. We are bad at marriage as a culture. 56% of marriages end in divorce. That is a bad statistic. If 10% of marriages ended in divorce, as someone who sees how painful divorce can be and expensive divorce can be and upsetting and frustrating and tumultuous it can be, if there was a 10% chance of it, it'd still be really dangerous. And I would say proceed with caution. But over 50%? Are you kidding me? Seriously? Like we're just going to charge into this thing and assume that it's the right thing to do? That's crazy.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you see people make before they get married?
I think presenting a totally false version of who they are, that's a huge one. Like when you're dating, it's like people just like put Spanx on their personality. There's a difference between lying and makeup, right? Like makeup accentuates the best part of you and decentuates the worst parts, right? But it's not straight out lying. Like if you say to someone, "Oh, I'm 6'2", but you're actually 5'4", it's a lie, you know. But makeup or a push-up bra, it's not lying. It's just accentuating something, right? It's a little dishonest, but I think it's really, really important before marriage to like be as honest with each other as possible, like to see each other without makeup, to see each other metaphorical and literal, like see each other when you're sick, see each other when you're under stress, like really test this thing a little bit, because I think to know a thing you have to know its limits, and I think when you push it you see its true nature. I think adversity, brings out the true nature of things. And so I think seeing something through adversity, seeing how it endures adversity, how does it overcome adversity? That's a huge piece. It's not something people often want to do before marriage. Like, how do you fight? That's important. Like, talk about how do you fight. If we disagree, what's that going to look like? If you're really mad at me, what's that going to look like? Let's talk about that. Like, let's get it out in the open. Let's figure it out, because, don't just put all that stuff aside. Go, we'll figure it out when we get there. No, no, no. You wouldn't say like, I'm trying to pack for this trip. What should I pack? I don't know. We'll figure out when we get there. Well, then no, that's the whole point of packing, is to like figure out in advance what you're going to need. So I think it's really important to think about that stuff in advance and be very blunt and honest with each other about it. And again, I get why when we're dating, we want to only show our best face. I understand. Like in the job interview, everybody's an amazing employee, and every place is a great place to work. But I think it's really like when I interview employees, like I won't just tell them about working at my firm. I'll leave them in a room alone with some of my employees, and I'll be like, tell this person the truth. Tell them like all the good, the bad, and the ugly about working here, because it's just too easy to just tell them the good stuff, you know. And I think it's really important to be honest in a long-term relationship from the beginning, if possible.
Yeah, I've heard that if you can't learn how to fight and navigate conflict, like your relationship, marriage will be destroyed and it won't work out. Or you'll be in a relationship or marriage that you're just miserable in anyway because you're just so disconnected from your partner. What have you found that to be some helpful strategies for couples, for partners that are navigating conflict that can actually like lead to more connection in the relationship?
Yeah, I think you're actually identifying what the core issue is, which is not just how do we navigate conflict, but how do we prevent conflict, right? I mean, some conflict is inevitable, but fighting is not inevitable, right? Conflict is inevitable. So, learning how to disappoint your partner tactfully and lovingly is, I think, really important. Like most people, you're not going to be able to 100% of the time give them everything they want, right? That's an unrealistic goal. So you're going to have to disappoint them from time to time. So it's probably better to learn how to disappoint someone occasionally in small ways than to disappoint them terribly in a giant way because you were so afraid of a small conflict that you build these very dysfunctional systems that cause a large conflict. So, like, it's better, I think, to learn early in a relationship how to tell someone something they don't want to hear and how to hear something from your partner that you wish wasn't true or that you don't want to hear, right? To disappoint them and to be disappointed by them and still love them and still feel loved by them, you know? And I think that's a huge, huge piece. Creating ways to communicate disappointment or disappointing news that are less toxic and less likely to lead to like big fights and big conflicts. And one of the suggestions I make in my book is called Hitting Send Now. There's a chapter called Hit Send Now, where I say you should actually use like email. I think email is actually a really good way to communicate tough things to your partner. And ideally when they're still kind of small. Because what I like about email is you can be thoughtful in how you phrase things. Like not everybody speaks in like, you know, the long Nietzschean paragraphs that like a Sam Harris or a, you know, Lex Friedman can do off the top of their heads. You know, sometimes people have a hard time phrasing something. So when you're writing something, you know, you can work on it. You can rework it until you say it the way you want to say it. You can even ask like a friend or a therapist or, you know, someone you trust, like, hey, what do you think of this? Did I say it the right way? If it's not something that you're afraid to share. And then also too, when you send it to your partner, you know, if you say to your partner, I want to talk to you, it feels confrontational, you know, and also they have to sort of immediately respond, or at least there's a pressure to feel like in a conversation, you're going to immediately respond. And that person might not be ready to do that. Or if they do, it might just be their off the cuff reaction that's going to be more defensive than if they had some time to digest it. So that's one of the reasons I like email, is that you can be thoughtful in its presentation and that this person can receive it in a less defensive way. And what I encourage people to do is to actually say to your partner, like have an open discussion of, look, we're going to create, calling it hit send now, like hitting send now. Like if you get an email and the subject heading is hitting send now, I'm just saying this to you. I'm sending this out there. I'm not saying you have to do anything. I just want you to know how I feel. And and the example that I use is like, we've all been in a situation, if we've ever been in relationships, we've all been in a situation where a partner says something and it like stings in some way. And they don't even realize it. Like they just keep moving, you know? Like we were out with friends and they're like, oh yeah, his sister does that all the time. But his sister's like so annoying and da da da. And then they just keep going. And you're like, oh, really? Like, wow. Like I thought you liked my sister. That's weird, you know? And like, you're not going to in front of a bunch of people be like, hey, what do you mean about my sister? Like, but it hurt. Like it stung a little bit. or they like cut off something you say, well, I mean, he's always saying that, but that's crazy, like, and it just stung. It's not you slap me in the face, but it's like, oh, that hurt a little bit. And so that's something that you can just leave that little burning hot coal and push it way down, and then just sort of like, well, and that's how, you end up in a relationship where like you're having a discussion about, like what's the best traffic route to take to get to the place you're going. And 10 minutes later, you're like, I never liked your mother. And it's like, wait, what like, where did that come from? And the answer is like, you just push and push down until the whole thing blows up. So I genuinely believe that having a technique where you could send, hit send now and say, look, the other night when we were out with friends and kind of made a comment about my sister, and maybe I took it too hard, but it just felt weird. Like I always thought you liked my sister, and it felt like you kind of were disrespecting her, and I didn't really know. And if there's some issue with you and my sister, like I'd like to know what it is, because I kind of thought you guys got along. And even if you have an issue with her, like it felt weird that in front of people that you said that, and I didn't know if I should defend her. Like it just felt weird. And that gives this person a chance to like write back and be like, oh my God, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. Like I just was just running my mouth, or I didn't mean to phrase it that way. Or maybe to say like, yeah, listen, your sister's never been kind of nice to me. And maybe I'm like carrying that around. And it gives like an invitation for people to have, a dialogue. So I think if you can learn how to openly share those small things. And I know, like, listen, there's a whole audience of people. I've heard this criticism before when the book came out. One of the most common things people were like, "You're telling me I should send emails every time my partner says something that upsets me? Like, are you kidding me?" Like, and you then say, "Don't criticize your partner." I don't see it as an opportunity to criticize. I see it as an opportunity. You're saying to this person, "I care enough about you and about us that I just want you to know me. I want you to know what I'm feeling and thinking so that we're not pushing things down because this is important to me." And I have to tell you, like, as someone who's been in relationships, when you frame it in your own head that someone is saying something to you because they care about you and because this is important to them, you hear it differently. You hear like there's a difference between someone yelling at you because they want to yell at you and yelling at you because the car is coming to hit you and they want you to get out of the way. Like one is to hurt your feelings, the other is to prevent you from being hurt. I think the more you hear your spouse telling you something you did or said that upset them as, hey, you're important to me, the better off you are.
What are some of the things that you recommend to people so that they can step into that next version of themselves so that they stop abandoning themselves when they're dating people?
Self-worth is such an interesting concept because we talk about things like self-love. And self-love to me is, we often think of it like bubble baths and cold plunges, maybe, and all these other things. Prioritizing of self. And ultimately, I think of self-love as being a, a group of rituals and habits because I can make a choice in this very moment that says I love me, and I can make a choice in this very moment that says I don't. So, if I'm someone who has addiction issues and all of a sudden I choose to do cocaine tonight and I've committed to myself that I wouldn't, I'm not going to love myself. And that's not an indication of a flaw in who I am. It's that I still have work to do and my habits and rituals and choices are not aligned with my values. So, the fastest way to completely change how you feel about you and how you show up in your life is to set a standard and then be the standard. You know, Anyone who really loves themselves is not going to tolerate someone who treats them poorly. And that's not to blame the person who tolerates someone who treats them poorly because they learned it somewhere, but it is the responsibility of the person to change their behaviors, to change their choices, and to change their outcomes. So your environment and your results you get in your relationships in your life are going to be reflective of how you feel about yourself. And when you don't get outcomes that you desire, it's not evidence of a failure, but of another opportunity to figure out how to do it differently. And I think anyone who's started, that's why I think entrepreneurship is such a great personal growth project. Because like you literally, the thing you're putting out there is the expression and manifestation of yourself. Oh, like if people don't like, just Post something about what you think on the internet. I promise you that whatever wound you have, there's a troll for it. You know, it's like so true. I know you know this.
Yeah, for sure. And I think always people are always looking for answers, right? They're like, "All right, I'm doing the work. I'm working on becoming this highest version of myself. I'm working on boundaries. I'm working on my inner child. I'm working on habits, behaviors, all these things. But is there anything I can do when I'm in a relationship or I'm dating somebody to know that the relationship won't fall apart?" I mean, a lot of people will say what breaks down relationships is loss of connection. And it's not something that happens overnight, it happens over time. What are your thoughts on what destroys relationships?
Well, not bringing the truth forward in the relationship. You know, you're right. It's that buildup over time of self silencing, of not speaking up, of not sharing what's coming up for us. You know, I think because in our culture we've really demonized people if their relationship ends. So, you know, we sort of treat people who are divorced. We're like, what's wrong with you? Why did you get divorced? You see people in dating profiles who don't want to date someone who's divorced. And what I think is so fascinating about that is the message is that I don't want to date or relate to people like that or become like that because they failed. And I'm like, well, if we were in a mature community and someone made a mistake, the community would say, teach us from your mistake because you learned something. And I find when a whole culture says divorce is bad and someone does it, I'm like, well, there's something actually kind of pioneering about that. Someone was willing to actually, and again, we're talking about like under the context, they left a relationship. They didn't like cheat and lie and do all these things. But that there is actually something about choosing oneself at the cost of being loved by the people around you. There's something really beautiful about witnessing that in someone. And so I think because we celebrate things like anniversaries, and, you know, if someone is married 75 years, we think that's better than someone who's married 10 years. So there's something about relational length that we say is indicative of relational success, which there is some truth to that. However, there are people who are married 75 years who hate each other. So we celebrate anniversaries, but we don't celebrate relational depth, which again shows you what the culture celebrates versus what is actually important. And the reason I say shaming people who get divorced, celebrating longevity over depth, why those are important on an unconscious level is because if I'm afraid that my relationship is going to end, I'm not going to have the conversations that might end it. But those are actually the very conversations that will deepen it. So I'd say relationships break down over time because people are not committed to the truth. They're committed to longevity at the cost of the truth. And that really is what leads to it, which is also that leads to self abandonment, which means that if you and I are in a relationship and we're not willing to tell each other the truth and really lay that down at the altar of our relationship, that means that we're in a relationship that requires that we lie, requires that we silence ourselves. Am I going to want to have sex with you if I blame you unconsciously for not being able to share how I truly feel? No, because I'm going to resent you. And so you see this sort of subtle, over time resentment build up in relational research. They call it contempt. And that is really hard to rescue a relationship from. But I'd say it's very normal for people not to fully express themselves because they don't have the skill set. You know, communication is a skill set and listening is a skill set.
Right, and it's why we've talked a lot about working on yourself, because I think in order to be able to trust somebody else, you have to be able to trust yourself. And the way to build self-trust is to be consistent with your actions and to make sure that, you know, what you do on a daily basis reflects the person you want to become and what you want in your life. But as far as like building trust and depth in a relationship, a lot of times it'll come back to, well, people think the only way for them to trust their partner is to know if they can open up to them when they're struggling or they're not happy in the relationship, which obviously is important. Are there other ways that you found that are maybe not so emotional that can help people build depth and trust in a relationship? So it's not always like during a moment of chaos.
Yeah, like just subtle habits that we can have in our relationship to fortify it. In in the research from the Gottmans, they talk about this positivity ratio. So they took couples who had just been married and they put them in these like a penthouse overlooking, I think it was Lake Washington. They called the Love Lab, and they recorded their conversations. So you can imagine, like, you just got married. We're going to put you in this condo and listen to everything you have to say. And then they followed up in 6 years and they looked at which couples were still married and which ones were divorced. And what they saw was that successful couples had above a 5-to-1 positive to negative interaction ratio. So below 5-to-1 divorce, above 5-to-1 relationship still together, 7-8-to-1 thriving relationship, 12-13-to-1 too much positivity that is not authentic anymore. Like, we know those people. It's like actually conflict avoidance. And so I always think about this. Well, does that mean that relationships and successful relationships are actually like as simple as math, or not as simple as math? Because we know math ain't always so simple, but we just have to increase the amount of positivity we experience. And that's true. If you actually notice, if you just today start to commit to changing how many positive interactions you have in any relationships, not just romantic, you will notice a dramatic shift in the relationship. And there's that saying that what we appreciate appreciates. And so we put these investments into the bank account of the relationship. And so what happens is that the balance is so high that over the long term, we're actually able to navigate life's challenges because there's more insulation from it. And I really love that way of thinking about it, that yes, it is the big conversations that matter, how we navigate conflict, but it's actually the little things. And the Gottmans call it bids. There are these like little micro moments where we're trying to connect. And I think of one that my parents would do when I was growing up at the breakfast table. You know, my dad would read the paper when people still do that. I don't even know.
My
But
grandparents do. Yeah.
yeah. And my dad would be like, huh. And then my mom would be like, oh, what are you reading? Or my wife, sometimes when she's reading something, I'll hear her be like, oh, I'm like, oh, what is it? That's a bid. She's making a bid. And so really successful couples turn to I think that in the research, it was like 87% of bids are positively returned. In couples that divorce, it's much lower, in the 30th percentile, somewhere around there.
That's crazy.
Isn't that nuts? I think it's just wild. Their research was made famous by Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, where he talks about how the Gottmans can listen to 20 hours, I think it is, of a couple conversating and dialoguing, like fighting, and predict with 94% accuracy if they'll divorce. And they can listen to just 3 minutes and predict with over 80% accuracy.
And it comes down to like the four horsemen, right? Isn't that what they call it?
Yeah, that's right. It comes down to what they call a soft startup. So, which is like how fights end is how they begin. So we have to learn how to begin our conflicts softly. And yeah, the four horsemen: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Those are 4 behaviors that I would say everyone does. So nothing to be ashamed of. It's rather, as I said, an opportunity to see how we handle conflict. And there's antidotes to all those 4 things. It's just that in couples that divorce, they're in really high quantity.
Going back to the positivity thing, because I think that can be overlooked. I think we talk so much about conflict, which is important. Maybe we'll get to that in a little bit. But like, do you think then it would be important to understand somebody's love languages or the way they like to receive love? Because positive to somebody could be positive to somebody else. If the love languages are true and somebody receives love by words, then a compliment would serve them well. Whereas if the other person receives love by acts of service, the compliment might not be as fulfilling. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, I remember working with this couple where she was like, I just feel like you don't like share that you love me. And he's like, are you kidding me? I couldn't love you more. Like, I drop you off at work every day. And she's like, but you don't tell me. So exactly what you're saying, like, he's an acts of service guy. So he's like dropping her off at work. He's having the best time. He thinks he's loving her the best she could ever be loved. And she's just missing it. And, they're kind of like just missing each other. And that's not a flaw of them. It's just that how they give and receive love is different, as you're talking about the 5 love languages by Gary Chapman. And gifts, acts of service, words of affirmation, time, that's right, quality time and physical touch. And we usually have a primary, and usually our primary is often the lowest one for our partner, which I think is really interesting how that works, because it's almost like the very thing we have the hardest time with is often the thing our partner needs. And we usually try to give love the way we receive it. So, for example, I have this friend who gives gifts all the time, like so many gifts. And I can just see that he loves through gifts and he wants me to give him gifts. And so we talk about it so he can recognize that, like, he wants me to do that. So he gives gifts because he wants to receive gifts. So we often do that is we'll like raise the bar on the thing we're doing so they'll finally notice and they'll get the hint. But the easiest thing is just do a quiz for free from the 5 love languages. I think it's 5lovelanguages.com, and you'll see each other's love language. I think it's fantastic opportunity to learn more about each other.
Totally. And like as far as um just things that you can do on a daily basis. I mean, do you think that like just scheduling time like throughout the day or throughout the course of a week, like going on, like I see people going on walks together to talk about their relationship. Do you think doing stuff like that can help like mitigate some of these bigger conflicts and fights that might arise?
Yeah, going for a walk when you're actually having a dialogue, like a conflict, is really powerful because you're walking side by side, shoulder to shoulder, like facing the path. It's great on an unconscious level of what you're actually trying to do with the world, with your lives, and you're getting exercise. So you're taking down your threat response. Nervous system work is really important because it's the health of your connection will really be the result of the health of your nervous system. So adding things like meditation to your regimen to practice because it turns that part between stimulation and response, it just gives you more time to make a better choice, to choose differently. Um, there's a couple practices that are really fascinating for couples to implement. One is my wife and I do it. It's 2 gratitudes and an appreciation. So the gratitudes are, what am I grateful for about life? Not each other, but life, and it can be each other. Um, and why? How did I create that? So obviously, if I say I'm grateful for the sunrise, I didn't create the sunrise, but I did create the time to appreciate the sunrise. And what that does is it unconsciously correlates that I am choosing these things. The appreciation is about the partner. What I appreciate about you is this, and here's why. Those are habits that really build beautiful insulation to the relationship, and we're keeping these positive interactions. There's another really interesting practice that I forget where I learned it, but it's to rate your partnership out of 10. So you're like, okay, well, now I'm a husband. I would have said boyfriend before. I'm just getting used to this. Like, out of 10, what kind of husband have I been this week? And, for some people, that can feel real scary, but we kind of play with it. It's like, she might be like, you were a 2. And I'm like, oh, Rick, I'm a 2. But really, it's like, what would have made me a 10? Like, if she gave me a 7, I'm like, okay, like, I can hear this. What would have made me a 10? And it gives me an opportunity to always learn how her needs are changing, because they are. My wife's need, everyone's needs are always changing. And what will meet, like, we have a new child. So what meets my wife's needs as a mother are very different than prior to having a kid. So it allows that changing of self. And it also is really just creating an environment of feedback. And that's actually really important, that the relationship is constantly giving you this opportunity to become better. And, when I was 21, I never thought, oh, like, my girlfriend is giving me an opportunity to be better. Like, now I can actually see that my wife or, my partners were always trying to make me better. I just didn't know how to hear it without feeling like I wasn't enough at the same time.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you genuinely rate yourself as a husband now?
Well, now that we have a kid, I'd say it dropped. It dropped. Would have said before, like, I'm an 8 to a 9. I never give it 10 because then there's always room for improvement. But I said I was like a 8 to a 9. I'd say having a kid, I dropped to a 6, probably, even at moments a 5, because of the emotional depletion, like the tired. Not that I wasn't still a good partner, but you're both so tired that where you haven't done the work yet with some communication gets really obvious. Like before, when you have the emotional bandwidth to the willpower, uh, it's not as evident because you're like well slept, you're well nourished, you're well everything. But if you notice, when people are depleted, that's where the work really matters. And I was doing a podcast on this, just saying, like, oh my God, instead of orienting to that from a place of like oh, I'm not enough. I can't believe I've let people down. It's like, I'm in the gym. Like, this is the gym. Don't waste this opportunity to see where my weaknesses are. And it's really offered me to see, like, oh, I still have more work to heal on defensiveness. I still have communication frictions that I need to work on, that we need to work on. And also, there's that postpartum, like, hormonal dysregulation that has an impact on the mother. And so just not taking that personally, also seeing that my wife has this like immense bond with our child, and then me feeling like I'm out, like the third. So being able to create space in the relationship to navigate all these things has been really beautiful. So I'd say I'd give myself a 6 to a 9 at times, but I'd say I'd spent more. My average was probably 7.
You strike me as somebody that's hyper self-aware now and very aware of your own tendencies, what you want to work on, what you're great at, what you're not so great at. Given what you just shared and that you want to maybe become less defensive, you want to work on your communication, you want to, take your husband rating up more consistently.
I like that.
Like what are some things that you're going to be implementing this year to work on that, either with yourself or with your partner or with your wife?
Such great questions. I'd say that one of the parts is when we aren't prioritizing ourselves as much, then that'll be reflective in how we show up in the relationship. And so now my gym regimen's back in full force. Like everything, my practices, my rituals are back in. Cold plunging and cold water exposure, I have to tell people, is really powerful for learning to observe your dysregulations, so that because your body's like, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. And really, you're not going to die. So it allows you to separate the observation of your response from how you actually are, your actual level of safety. For me, I think, yeah, really dialing down the rituals and the habits. And then the other side of it is I've been playing with, when you listen to someone like Eckhart Tolle or Byron Katie, they talk about their awakenings being these observations of their responses, but they are not them. Like Eckhart Tolle talks about like my pain body, and you're like, that must be so interesting to observe your biological response from such a detached place and then always choose love. And I think it's important to clarify for you listening that there's a difference between being compassionate about where a behavior comes from in someone and being tolerant of it. Because I often hear this like, oh, it's not unconditionally loving to leave somebody. It's not unconditionally loving to hold a standard. And it's like, no, that's actually love. And I've been playing with this, like, how do I actually become more observant of my emotional responses so that I can choose the path as best I can, as many times as I can. And so I've been really playing with that, where I notice more activation if I'm in a conversation with my wife or even something with work, let's say, for example, that I'm able to take a breath, really acknowledge that there's nothing urgent. How do I want to show up? What do I want to say in this moment that is changing me and changing our relationship? And so that's something I'm really like, that's at the forefront of my work now, is how do I really navigate that?
There's a lot of roadblocks right now for you as far as a breakup. Like it's not like, I mean, you're married, you have a kid together, you're obviously a great guy, very self-aware, committed to working on yourself, so that the odds of you getting broken up with or divorced super quick are slim to none, right? But there's a lot of people that struggle with this thing where they're in a relationship with somebody, they know they need to work on certain things, and it's like, what's the timeline like to be able to know, like, all right, like, is this going to end up working out with somebody? Like, how much time should I ask for from my partner to hold the space and be compassionate to me, like working on some of these unhealthy patterns I might have? And then on the other side of that, like, how do you know if you're just being hyper tolerant? Like if somebody's, not really changing and it's been like 6 months. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh man, that's such a good question, because that's so many people's lives. First off, each person gets to decide what the timeline is. Like, if I don't see this change in 3 months, 6 months, a year, I think with relationships that are longer, there's probably more insulation to that. Also, if there's been a built up level of credibility and trust and all that. But if your whole relationship has been spent with you chasing someone to change and they're never changing, it's a pretty good evidence that you need to change how you orient to people not changing, that it's actually your challenge now. Because usually what you see in relationship where one person wants another person to change, they've probably spent a lot of their lives wanting other people to change. So we want to like heal the pattern of chasing, heal the pattern of orienting to other people. You see this in codependency. It's like I'm trying to get them to read the book, them listen to the podcast, them, and it's like our addiction is trying to get people to change, to be enough for them, to like help them. And real, when you think about two adults meeting eye to eye, one adult says, "Hey, I noticed this about you. Here's what I need from you." And the other one grows up and changes, and you take turns doing that. And when someone says they're going to change, the first thing is to get agreements on what that looks like. So if I'm talking to my partner and she's working on something, you know, now our relationship is just so rock solid in the sense that we trust each other. When we say we're going to do something, we do it. There's plenty of evidence for that. So even when we say we choose each other, there's plenty of evidence that that's true. So our commitments are trustworthy. And we're not going to go anywhere because there's small deviations in, you know, our abilities or a skill set or something like that. We actually see our relationship as the place that we grow. We see our relationship and our partner as the wisdom, the person who's providing me with the wisdom for my transformation, and also the support and space to do that, and the accountability. So when someone says they're going to change and they don't, that feedback needs to be delivered. And at some point, a boundary has to have a consequence, because boundaries without consequences are just suggestions. And so if we end up staying with or even giving commitments to people that we're going to change and we don't, we're eroding the trust of the relationship. And ultimately, we don't trust ourselves. And ultimately, our word is worth nothing. And we know that, and they know that. And so we might just keep swimming in the shame of that and keep doubling down on that. We might cheat, we might leave, we might do something instead of changing.
You see, a lot of times you see people, they go into dating or into a relationship and they've got everything together. They're like, I know what I want, I know what I need. And they meet the person and the chemistry's great, the attraction's great, things are moving quick, and then their values seem to go out the door. Like, you're like, I'm not going to date somebody who doesn't like ice cream, and then the person doesn't like ice cream, and but you're like attracted to them. You're like, you know what, they're cool, we get along well. And then the person's like, I don't like and the person's like, I'm not going to settle for somebody who doesn't want to travel the world with me. And the other person like doesn't like to travel, and they're like, well, we have great chemistry and we're getting along well, so they'll come around. Like, what is it about love that is so like overwhelming that it forces us to get lost in it and lose our sense of self the minute we're attracted to somebody?
I think that's when we're orienting to relationship from a pretty scarce place. Because, as I said at the very beginning, it's like if you're not clear on what you want, you'll settle you'll take what isn't. You'll just take fleeting connection. But that's also this idea that connection is scarce. Connection isn't scarce, but if we're drawn to someone who, there's this really interesting study that points to exactly what you're talking about, where they had people write down everything they wanted and then they speed dated. And then they ended up with matches with people who were not what they wanted, but they had chemistry with. So they like throw out the lists they just created because of connection. So that points right to the origin that we're willing to abandon what we truly desire for connection. So I'm placing connection with someone else ahead of the sacred love and connection to myself. So if I have to leave my center to choose you, you're not a good choice for me. But if I learned growing up that it was connection above everything, connection to my dad, connection to my mom, sacrifice self, then as an adult, I'll continue to play that out. So when love came with those kind of conditions as a kid, love will exist with those kind of conditions as an adult, thinking that's just normal. That's not normal. Sorry, that might be normal, but that's not healthy.
If you had to guess why like 90% of relationships fail today, what do you think that would be?
Oh, I just literally interviewed the Gottmans. So Dr. Julie and Dr. John Gottman from the Gottman Institute, and they've been doing studies in science and studying couples and their behavior over periods of 20, 30, 40 years. And what are the identifying factors that make relationships last versus what are the identifying factors that actually indicate a relationship is going to fail? And one of the things is, over time, you start to build contempt. And that's what they call one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And that's the most dangerous one. And so when you think about a relationship, when you first meet someone, you've got all the oxytocin, you guys are loving each other, you've got all the fun and new things. And so all the issues that may come up, all the annoying things the person may do, it doesn't really annoy you because you've got all this beautiful love juice that's flowing through you. But over time, as you start to grow, as you start to change, as you start to have goals and dreams and you go on different paths, how do you communicate? How do you adapt and evolve together? And that's been a big key for me and Tom, is that we adapt and evolve together. But I think a lot of couples don't. And so what happens is you're not the same person you were at the age of 20 and at the age of 30. You're not the same person you are at the age of 30 that you are at the age of 40. So now imagine you've got a relationship that you start to build, you start from love, excitement, but you don't have the communication. Over time, your communication just breaks it down more and more. And so according to the Gottmans, contempt starts to evolve. Now, contempt can be things like rolling of the eyes, the tisking of people. Now, that isn't almost a verbal thing that you can maybe have a discussion with, right? If we were dating and you rolled your eyes at me, or we were together and you rolled your eyes at me, I could maybe call you on the roll eyes, or typically what I'll do is ignore it. Right? Most people are like, whatever. You do those eye rolls enough, they say that there's 5-to-1 of good versus bad that will make a relationship last or not. So if you do an eye roll once, you need to give your partner at least 5 other compliments in order to outweigh the one eye roll that you've given. So now imagine over time, as couples start to evolve and get together longer and longer, you ignore the eye rolls, the contempt starts to build, and then it comes to a point where you start to argue about stuff that actually you're not really arguing about. So you argue about, the dishes, and that one thing that you argued about where it's like, it doesn't really matter about the dishes. 5 years later, you are now having a freaking screaming match at each other about the dishes. But it's not about the dishes. It's about the contempt that has built up that then leads to the explosion on something else. So I think when it comes to looking at 90% of relationships, how they fail, why relationships fail, it's the slow burn. It's the slow thing that happens over time. I call it the water that drops on the rocks that eventually changes its shape. Like over time, if a water just drips on a rock, the rock will change its shape. So now think about that being negativity on your mindset and your self-esteem and how you feel about yourself. That negativity that the person's dripping on you eventually changes who you are. It makes you more angry. It makes you more contemptuous towards them. And so as you can see, it starts to then spiral. So then you blink and you go from being in love to then literally screaming matches.
Right. And so you and Tom have been married for a long time. You've evolved a lot together. You've grown and scaled some massive businesses, but you both are so incredibly busy and you both wear so many different hats, in the businesses. How do you make those shifts to come back as a couple and focus on the relationship and prioritize the relationship, as, life and business is so busy?
Yeah, so first of all, I would definitely start with exactly what you said. You have to prioritize the relationship. And that needs to be, you have to have a verbal agreement with your partner to make sure you're on the same page. But then the next part is you have to identify, what does prioritizing mean? Because I actually spend more hours on my business than I do on my relationship. So there's a difference between prioritizing your time on a day-to-day basis and prioritizing something when they come into conflict. So when I have a problem in my business, and if I had the problem in my relationship and they happened at the same time, I'm not conflicted. I prioritize my relationship 1000%. Tom would do the same. But on a day-to-day, we actually show up more for the business. So that's where you have to get in the nitty-gritty and actually start to communicate the small little details that come with how do you prioritize. So that's number one. Number two is you it's kind of like a job because we run a business together. Me and my husband, we definitely talk about like our relationship, kind of like jobs, how we approach things. So just like a business, in our relationship, we both have certain skill sets that we're better at and other skill sets that we're not. And so what we do is we looked at our characteristics, and I said, okay, I'm actually better at identifying sooner when Tom and I are starting to drift apart. Number one, because I actually have a shorter threshold than he does. So he could probably go like a month without a date and he'd be fine. I can probably go 2 weeks without a date and I'd be fine. After that 2 weeks, I start to feel the distance, but he doesn't. I don't take that personally. I just address the honesty that we're two different people and we have different ways of receiving love. And so I don't take that personally, but because of that, we agreed that I was the person that was going to wave the flag when we start to drift apart, because he doesn't feel it as soon. So again, we just had that agreement that I was that person that was going to do that. Then the second part of that agreement is he must reciprocate. So if I wave the flag, he must immediately drop everything. I mean, not on the spot, right? But if I say to, hey, I'm really feeling the distance, it's been a few weeks, I need date night, he would say, absolutely, what do you need me to do? So those little things that we have in our personal life that we then echo into our business has allowed us to know who's the responsible party? Who's the responsible party to wave the flag when we're finding the distance? Who's the responsible party to address it? How do we address it? What do we do? We just broke everything down. We got so nitty gritty, just like we do in our business. We did that in our personal life. And the reason is that no one takes a chance for their business to hope to succeed. Right? You set goals, you set priorities, you set to-do lists. But for some reason, we don't do that in our personal life. And you better believe I'm willing to work way harder at my relationship than I am at my business. So if I'm doing this work in my business, I absolutely will do twice as much work, twice as much communication, twice as much planning on the relationship side. And that has precisely been how we've been together for 23 years and built multiple companies and lived in separate countries, and all the things that we've endured is because we've done that kind of breakdown of being honest with each other, assigning responsible parties, and then making sure our communication with the words that we use are understood. So, and what I mean by that is if I say to my husband, it's important, I use that word important to him, he knows it actually means he has to drop everything. Now, here's the key. I probably use the word important with him twice a year. But we've made an agreement that if I need him and something really is important, I'm going to use that word. And if I use that word, it means that he stops what he does and he pays attention. And so, yeah, just being very clear on our communication is that third piece that has really enabled us to be together for so long.
People see you all online now and they may assume that things have always been sunshines and roses with you too, but I know that's not the case from reading your book and just watching content and interviews that you've done. I know there was a point where you kind of lost yourself in Tom's plan and the vision for what you both were wanting to create. I know there was a point where you were unhappy as a stay-at-home wife and you felt like you were lacking purpose and meaning. How did you not just find the courage to find your voice, because I think obviously that's challenging, but how did you do it in a way that wasn't destroying your marriage and relationship? Because I think a lot of times when people they're like, oh, I found myself, I'm tired of being walked all over, I'm done.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm going to take over, and they end up destroying their relationship.
It's so true. And I was so aware of that it made me realize I had to really have a plan, going back to business plans. I had to have a plan on how I was going to approach it with the goal of me and my husband staying together. So number one was I just owned that the 8 years that I was an unhappy housewife, and I want to make sure people hear me, it's not that a housewife is bad, it's that it wasn't my dream. So living a life that isn't your dream, let's kind of encompass it there. I did that for 8 years. Number one, I had to own that was on me. I didn't speak up. I didn't tell Tom that I was unhappy. I was the one that chose to people please. I was the one that chose to sacrifice. So I had to take ownership over that. Secondly, I had to take ownership over that. I didn't communicate that with him. So that was really step number one, is go up to him and be honest about the fact that I was miserable. I felt like I'd given up on my dreams. And now I was starting to find myself again. And I had to communicate that that was on me so that he didn't feel badly. Then the other part was to acknowledge that I was changing. I was the one that told him when we first got married that I wanted 4 children. I was the one that decided I didn't want children. So I had to approach him with grace that of course he's going to have a reaction. I think sometimes when you build your confidence, you think that, okay, I'm going to go in and I'm like, this is who I am and this is what it's going to be like. And, like it or lump it. It's like, okay, going back to the goal, is that going to bring my husband closer to me or further away? It's going to make him feel disrespected. It's going to make him feel dismissed, like his opinion doesn't matter. And I really believe that when you're in a relationship, you have to listen to your partner's opinions. And so I went in there saying, I'm going to express to him how unhappy I was. I'm going to express to him how happy I now am. I'm finding myself. I'm finding my confidence. And then I'm going to give him space to be honest with how he feels. I'm going to give him space to be honest, to say all the hard things to me. And then I'm going to finally give him time to grieve. And what I mean by that is grieve the wife that I was. I was putting out clothes for him every single day. I mean, to the point where he was waking up, his clothes would be next to him. He would get changed. He would go to the gym. He'd come back from the gym. His clean clothes were waiting for him. He'd leave for work. I would hand him a lunchbox. He would come home from work. His dinner was on the table. Like I really prided myself on being a very good, traditional, I would say, Greek housewife. But I never wanted to do that anymore. Now, when you do that for 8 years, for me to turn around and say to him, well, now you're just on your own, is actually disrespecting him again on the transition that we're going through. So in order for me to bring him into my life, my world, the way that I needed to approach things, I said, I'll give you space. I'll give you the time to grieve the wife that I was. And so here's a suggestion. And so I laid out a plan for him. And I said, what if I cook and clean for you this week, 7 days, like I normally do. Next week, I'll do it only 6 days. The week after, I'll do it for 5 days. And then the week after, I'll do it for 4. And I'll wean you off me taking care of you from a traditional standpoint. How does that feel? And he felt heard. He felt respected. And then, because I was like, I eventually won't do laundry. But once I broke it down, once he started to feel all those things, he just turned around to me and said, babe, what kind of husband would I be if I put clean underwear ahead of my wife's happiness? Mm. And so now he felt good about the fact that he was accepting not having necessarily clean underwear, to the point that one day he was going to work, and it was like one day, days at Quest, and he was going to work, and I hadn't done the laundry because we were so busy. Quest was growing so quickly that the last thing I was thinking about is doing the laundry. And he literally yelled from the other room. He's like, babe, I don't have clean underwear, so I'm going commando. Bye. And he felt so good about himself that he felt like he was supporting me by going to work without underwear. So that's what commando is. You go without underwear.
Yeah.
He felt good about himself. So now imagine I handled it a different way. I came in telling him, this is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. You're going to have to like it and lump it. Do you think that eventually when he finds that he doesn't have clean underwear, that he's going to be happy about it? He's going to be in his own world, because we all take things personally, whether we want to or not. So those were really the key things that I did in order to bring us together in this moment that really could have ripped most couples apart.
I know one of the other things that's been really helpful for you is finding your own mission and purpose. And a lot of that has come through your podcast and your content and your book. And I know that your purpose is like you're waking up and trying to inspire, like you're trying to reach the 14-year-old Lisa. Why is that?
Yeah. Because I think it's Mother Teresa that says let me do that again. I think it was Mother Teresa that said one more time. Mother Teresa said, not everybody will fight for the masses, but everyone will fight for the one. And what that means is who do you wake up for every day and fight for? Now, for me, I need to fight for something or someone. I need that pull that when I feel insecure, when I don't feel like I'm good enough, when I don't feel like I have the skill set, when I feel like I'm going to be mocked or teased or bullied for doing something, or, I that internal negative voice that's like, well, Lisa, you're not good enough. Why on earth are you going to do it? I need something to go back to as my North Star is what I like to call it. I need that pull. And so what's that emotional pull that gets you past your own ego? What's that emotional pull that gets you out of your own head and propels you forward? And so at Quest, it was my mum. I grew up with a mum that was borderline anorexic. And then as an adult, she pivoted and fluctuated into being morbidly obese. And so every day as we're building Quest, and I didn't feel good enough, every day I felt imposter syndrome. I had been a housewife for 8 years and I was thrown into an incredibly fast startup. And so I was facing my inadequacies every day. And so I had to have a North Star. And so that North Star was my mum. I don't want to do this. I don't know how to do this. Well, okay. Are you going to help your mum? Yes or no, Lisa? And every time I would think of my mum, I would then propel myself forward. So as I started to realize we were dealing with the body with Quest, that was amazing. As we pivoted into impact theory and women of impact and my book on confidence, it started to be, what is that, who is that one that I can actually wake up to every morning and fight for, even when I don't feel good enough? And I realized it was the 14-year-old Lisa. It was the 14-year-old that wished I had the content that I create now, when I didn't feel like I was deserving of anything, when I didn't, I was bullied and teased by, sadly, other women, other girls. So every morning now I wake up and I think to myself, if I don't overcome this, if I don't overcome this hurdle, if I don't overcome this failure, if I don't overcome this inadequacy, then you're not going to help that 14-year-old girl that really needs you, Lisa. And you better believe that's just a strong enough North Star that nothing has stopped me.
I love to hear that. And I know that, before you've done this reinvention of yourself, you fell into the traps of people pleasing, not having good boundaries, trying to fit in, doing things for the wrong reasons, being afraid to stand up for yourself. What are some of the other biggest self-sabotaging habits that you think are destroying people's lives?
I think the validation that we don't actually even realize. So we get, we all want to feel good about ourselves. And so sometimes we'll do something that makes us feel good, but we actually don't like the thing itself. And what I mean by that is I got stuck for 8 years being a stay-at-home wife because I was told, oh my God, you're such an amazing stay-at-home wife. Everybody was giving me accolades. My dad was so proud of me, oh, my Greek daughter is being, a good wife. So my dad was proud of me. My mum was proud of me. My husband definitely liked it. And so I was getting validation of being a stay-at-home wife. And so when I started to that's the hard thing, I think, that really keeps people, because you get stuck because you are getting something out of being stuck. Take off those, the blinders and just look at why you're stuck and what that validation piece is. And so what I realized was I had such low self-esteem that I was holding on to something that didn't serve me, didn't serve my dreams, and it didn't serve my future, but it sure as hell filled up my heart from the validation standpoint. And what I realized is in order to make the pivot, I had to find ways to build the validation within myself instead of seeking it from external sources. And I think that holds people back so much, because a mother likes to feel like a good mother. A wife wants to feel like a good wife, hopefully, right? Whatever that thing is, you want to feel good about yourself. And so that was one thing I really realized that enabled me to make that pivot and to stop people pleasing. And instead of someone else saying, oh my God, thank you, Lisa, you're so amazing. And that's where I get my validation from. What can I do every day to build my validation so that when I realize I'm doing something I don't want, I can actually stop it before I get to the point where I then get sucked back in? And so that really became, okay, what are the things that you can do? I love working out. All right, Lisa, do a challenge for yourself. Tell yourself that you're going to do 30 push-ups and work on the 30 push-ups. And every day you're going to be proud of yourself that you showed up. That's building your validation. Telling yourself that you're going to be the type of person that is going to say the hard thing to your partner, even when it's not easy. Okay, I did it. That built validation within myself that I can do the hard things. And so I started to put lists together of all the things that I can approach that is just me. That's the key. It has to be just you. It can't be tied to someone else. Because it has to be either you did it or you didn't. You can't use excuses of like, oh, but so-and-so didn't show up, so I wasn't able to. No, either you did it or you didn't. And every time you say, I did it, it builds that validation piece that allows you to then feel confident enough to be able to then, like I said, say no to the people pleasing, set the boundaries when it doesn't actually align with you. And I'm not saying any of this is easy. I am a student and I love to freaking grow and learn every single day. And so when I said, oh, okay, validation, let me set a boundary on something that doesn't make me feel good. I don't have to set a boundary. So I'm like, how do I set a boundary? Let me do my research. And so listen to a podcast on setting a boundary is a step in building my validation, because I know that now I'm doing the things that I promised myself I would do.
I want to get into the conversation of confidence and radical confidence, because I think obviously this is a big part of your work and your message right now. And so many people struggle to build confidence. They think they can just like stand in the mirror and say, I'm enough, I'm good enough. And all of a sudden, they're going to become more confident. What do you think is the blueprint to building radical confidence from somebody who's like on the couch, completely unhappy, lost, miserable, and they want to get to Lisa Bilyeu, who's this boss who's like incredibly confident, setting boundaries, doing away with people pleasing and everything else?
Well, so hopefully, by me saying that I'm not always confident is a great indicator to people that confidence isn't a one and done. You don't just achieve it. It's not an end goal that you cross a finish line and you're done. So even now, of course, I have a lot of moments that I don't feel confident. So what are the skill sets and what are the blueprints and what are the tactics that I go to when I need to feel good enough to take that first step? And that's really the key for me. Confidence is the end goal. It's the byproduct of taking action. And I just want to repeat that so your audience really sinks in. Confidence is the byproduct of taking action. So people wait for the confidence usually to then act. And it's the other way around. And I think that we are doing ourselves a disservice to wait to feel confident. Now, just telling somebody, well, just do it anyway, is not understanding why people don't actually do it anyway. And again, it's because you think that you want to feel good. When I feel good enough, then I'm going to do it. So here's something I want to post to your audience. What if that when never comes? What if it never comes? Are you happy? Do you want to live your life the way it is? And again, this is your life. You need to answer it for yourself. But if the answer is no, then great. Now you just have to make a change. Okay, so how do you make that change? How do you do those acts in order to build the confidence? You have to identify what you're trying to work towards. So if you're sitting on a couch and you're saying, I want to have the confidence like Lisa, in what? In business, in relationships, because it is different. The way I build my confidence in business is very different than how I build my confidence in my relationship. It's very different than how I build my confidence with my family, to speak up and set boundaries with them. So identifying what you actually want confidence in is going to be key. Like, know your end goal. And then write some stepping stones in order to get there. So that's the easy one that I give the example to is really, let's say, working out. People, let's say somebody really wants to get fit. They've heard why health is really important. They understand the importance of movement, but they just don't feel good enough. They don't feel good enough to go to the gym, to pick up some weights, to, be confident enough to put on those Spanx or whatever and, that tank top and go to the gym. Okay. That's very valid, but at least you've got a goal. You know exactly what you're trying to get to. You want to get to have confidence in the gym. Step number 1, maybe you just have to buy your sneakers. Step 2, maybe you drive to your local gym and you buy the membership. Step 3, maybe you just search and see where the parking is. Step 4, maybe you walk in and you walk one lap around the gym. That's how you'll eventually get to the point where you can show up at the gym, pick up the weights, wear those sexy, Spanx or whatever that you've been dying to wear, and then you feel good about yourself. It has to be a stepping stone. It has to be little by little by little, because just saying do it anyway, it will be so overwhelming for people, they don't actually know how to start. And so this literally is what I do with everything. I look at my business, I look at leadership, I look at my relationship and say, what am I trying to do? What's the blueprint? What's that first step that I need to do to get there? How do I feel about myself? Great, Lisa, you just bought your sneakers. I can feel damn good that I told myself today I was going to buy sneakers for the gym. And that's the validation piece again. You're starting to build that validation in yourself that gives you just enough confidence to turn up at the gym that eventually leads to competence. You do something enough, it leads to competence that then leads you to building your confidence.
You there?
I am. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure. You didn't pause on my end. Did
Oh,
you hear
okay,
that
good.
last part?
Yeah. Confidence builds competence, right? Yeah. So I think a lot of people they find it easy in many ways to build confidence in various areas of their lives. I think the one area they really struggle with is relationships. It's like they can be confident in the gym, they can be confident at work, they can be confident with their family, but once they get into a romantic relationship, like everything goes out the window at times. And I know you talk a lot about relationships, and I know like the new chapter in your book is about this. How can people develop the confidence to walk away from a relationship that's not serving them?
Oh, yeah. So thank you. This was one of those things that I couldn't believe it wasn't a chapter originally in my book. And then when I realized and started to do kind of my own deep dive and research in my audience and my community, it's the relationship piece. It's like you can be a beast in business. You can set boundaries. You can feel good about yourself. You go into the gym, you freaking crush it. And then you have a bad relationship and all of a sudden your confidence is in the toilet. And so I was like, wow, we really have to identify this piece that is really holding us back. And I think that what happens is we end up, the people that it ends up really denting their confidence, in my experience, is people who have been in manipulative relationships, where over time, again, going back to that drip, that water that drips enough on a stone that ends up it changing its shape. You think about manipulation like that, you think about that in a relationship over time, where someone diminishes you, someone puts you down, someone keeps saying negative comments. So what happens is you just shrink yourself a little. You shrink yourself a little more. You start to speak up maybe, and the person puts you down again. So you're like, well, it doesn't matter. Maybe I just won't speak up. Maybe I just won't push back. Oh my God, that argument was so bad. I don't ever want that to happen again. So maybe I just won't say what I need. Maybe I just won't ask for this. Maybe. And over time, just like that rock changes its shape, you end up changing yours. So you have this confidence and it's literally withered away. And it is really about identifying the type of relationship you're in. I don't want to just label everybody toxic. I think that it's very important to just, it's becoming a little clickbait with toxic and narcissism. And I think it is important to assess, is it actually toxicity and narcissism, or is your partner going through a really rough patch? If your partner's just lost their job, if someone in their family's just died, it's like, yes, they're going to be hard to live with for a while if they're dealing with health issues. So the first thing is to separate the thing that's a temporary issue, where they're being a little mean. Maybe they're saying things that aren't very nice, but they're not being disrespectful, but they're not necessarily a nice person to be around. Identify, is it because they're going through something? If it's not, and they're always like that, start to identify, is it a characteristic that can evolve and change? Or now I'm going to label, are they a narcissist and they literally cannot change? And so then once you've identified that, then it's up to you to see if you want to leave the relationship or not. I'm not here to judge anybody. There's so many reasons people stay in a relationship that isn't good for them, and they have to make that decision for themselves. And it can be kids, it can be family, it could be financial, it can be a whole host of reasons. But then you have to look at, what does life look like in 5 years if you stay with them? What does your life look like in 10 years if you stay with them? And is that a life that you want? And if the answer is no, then it starts to be, how do you leave? How do you communicate? And then again, if it was me, I would go into my research. It would be like, okay, if it's a narcissist, you can't just tell a narcissist, you're a narcissist and I'm leaving. Right. It has to be handled in that can actually be rather dangerous. And so from a verbal abuse to physical abuse. So I would do my research. and I would see, how do I leave a narcissistic relationship? And I've, interviewed so many amazing people, and my favorite is just Dr. Ramani, who her work is just incredible and saves lives. She is the narcissist expert. So if anyone wants more information, they should really go check out. I do a lot of interviews with her. And so, yeah, so that's how I would kind of break it down. And if it was just toxicity, I would find a way to, okay, can I just leave? But if they've got control of the finances, how do I try to get the control back? What is that navigation? So there's a lot of complexity to leaving a relationship. But for me, I think it would always be assessing those elements first, so I know what I'm getting into as I leave that, and then how to maneuver and navigate it. Having the tools, because if you've never done it before, if you've lost your confidence, you may feel lost. But I just want to tell people right now, you're not alone. Like, you are not alone. There's research, there's people out there that can help, there's therapy, there's my show Women of Impact. Like, there's a lot of people that can show you that you're not alone and help you find ways out. But the key is knowing you can find a way out. And it's that hope piece, that idea that you can change, you can have a different life. You've just got to believe it in order to take the action.
What are some healthy ways, if somebody has a disagreement, to be able to settle that without it creating distance in a relationship?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I'm such a huge encourager of writing letters. Because writing letters isn't just for the healing process. To me, writing letters are great ways of communicating, so that we don't fall into the trap of getting into an argument, so that people, because when you're addressing a lot of issues, people can get defensive, people can deflect, distractions can come about. There's so many things that can make the conversation go left, and you don't properly address anything, or we can fall into an argument. But with a letter, it allows you to get everything off your chest. Make sure you correct your tone, make sure you convey the message fully. It allows the receiver of the letter to process things in their own time, at their own pace. They're able to process without the need to rebuttal in the moment. And that's the thing. When you think about it, what derails a lot of conversations, verbal conversations, is that while you're talking, that person is listening so they can formulate their rebuttal. They're trying to process and angle their argument at the same time. Yeah. So you're not giving your energy to any one thing fully, which is why you don't end up hearing properly, or you don't end up expressing yourself properly in return. But when it's via a letter, you're able to just focus on receiving the message. And then whether you write a letter back or now you communicate verbally back, you're able to now focus on just giving the message. So it allows both sides to be more effective at both listening and expressing. And so I would argue that that's the best approach. But then on top of that, always having safety measures for when we do fall off track. So, okay, if we do start to talk verbally, because sometimes that's inevitable, we're going to have verbal conversations that can get a little out of hand. Well, the minute it gets out of hand, somebody has to be able to say, hey, pull us back. We have to recognize, okay, when this happens, one of us has to call that out, and we both need to agree. Maybe it's, okay, we step aside, go in timeout for a second, cool down, then we come back. Maybe it's having a 2-hour cool off period before we even start the discussion. Just coming up with different agreed upon, understood safety measures. And the reason why also that's very important to do that in advance is because one of the most annoying things is to want to talk to your partner and they're like, okay, I need time. And now you're sitting there wondering, okay, how much time do you need? And now it's 2 hours, it's 4 hours, it's 24 hours. And now you become more agitated. And again, because there's no pre-agreed structure, the vagueness creates confusion, creates chaos, creates more animosity and resentment. But once we can agree in advance, okay, if the agreement is you get 4 hours to cool off and that's it, all right, now there's less confusion there. Now when they say, I need some time, you get it. Okay, I get it. You need your 4 hours. Go take it. I don't have to sit there and rack my brain about when are we going to finally get to talk. I know it's in 4 hours. So now I can focus on something else until those 4 hours are up and we go talk. So discussing those things in advance and creating as much guidelines and structure and clarity is going to help remove all the pitfalls that happen from arguments and heated discussions.
Yeah, I think that communication and handling conflict are two of the most important things for having a healthy and long lasting relationship. So other than having healthy dialogue around conflict, what are some other things that couples should communicate about, like, in advance to set their relationship up for success?
Well, definitely an agreement to never speak disrespectfully to each
Yeah.
other. There has to be an understanding that, listen, we can disagreement is acceptable, disrespect is not. So we don't have to always agree. We're not going to always see eye to eye, but we cannot fall into the trap of being disrespectful to each other. I think also we have to create an environment where we don't let issues linger without addressing them, because that's another huge pitfall for a lot of relationships, is that you do something, your girl gets mad, but she doesn't tell you, she doesn't fully express it for whatever reason, she just holds on to it. And now, because she's holding on to it, she starts to catch an attitude with things and you're like, I don't understand what's going on. Like, you have no clue what she was mad at a few days ago, because she didn't say anything. And now this lingering attitude is only confusing you more, pissing you off. Now you start to have attitude. You see, and it just snowballs from there. So we have to have an agreed upon understanding that when an issue arises, it needs to be addressed within 24 hours. And if you do hold on to it for whatever reason, and I ask you what's wrong, you got to be able to say, I'm pissed off about the other day. You can't say nothing. Okay.
Right,
And
right.
then now I'm over here confused as to what the issue is. And again, these things always contribute to unhealthy environment, unhealthy communication, and other issues arising in the relationship. To me, those are probably the biggest ones. And then I like to have what I call relationship checkups, where there's a structure of, okay, maybe once every 3 months or once every month, whatever you want to make it, where we agree to sit down, discuss these things, and go over what we like, what we don't like, kind of a relationship review, so to speak. So again, we don't let issues linger. We create an environment where we're always being open and transparent with each other, and we're keeping things in proper alignment and on the proper path.
Mm. So outside of the communication and healthy, like, conflict resolution and some of the other things that you just talked about, what are some of the other main things that you see that seem to lead to relationship breakdowns?
Well, honestly, that's most of it. I think it's really just, again, the lack of healing that leads to
Yeah.
relationship breakdowns, because what I've seen is that a lot of issues aren't even about your current partner. It's projections from past
Mhm.
relationships, past experiences that you're now putting on your partner. You're now being triggered by little things that, again, your partner doesn't even know is an issue or understand the issue, and that's also why that inner journey and that healing is so important, so that you even understand why you get triggered about something. I've had plenty of times where clients got upset, and when you ask them why, they didn't understand why they were triggered. So, and that's why it's so important to just do the work within yourself, because you just run such a huge risk in devaluing your relationship. And I think, the reality is that, again, when you have not healed, it's going to contribute to you even choosing the wrong person to be with. And that is the start of relationship conflict. You're simply with the wrong person. And so, even with some great structure and understanding and effective communication, you're going to have a hard time because you're with someone you don't properly align with. And the
Right.
reality is that some people are just going to hold on to their issues. Some people are just toxic right now, and they're not going to fix that while with you. They
Mm.
might fix it some point in their life, and unfortunately, some people go to their grave never fixing it. And so that's why it's so important to make sure there's a foundation of healing within people's lives before we get too deep with each other in a committed relationship.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things too that you talk about that is extremely important for people to know is that one of the big things that people can one of the big things that can help somebody know if they're with the right person or not is if they feel connected. Because I think we live in a world now where the big word that's thrown around is chemistry. Like, oh, I have chemistry with this person, or we get along. Like, there's many people that we can all get along with. You know, if you're a good person, if you have healthy communication, if you're a nice person, you can get along with a lot of people. Doesn't mean you're going to have this deep, meaningful connection that's going to lead to you spending the rest of your life with them. So if you could explain the difference between having chemistry with someone and a connection, and how does somebody know if they're feeling connected versus just having chemistry?
Yeah. So, and you're 100% correct. I think a lot of people try to use chemistry as a foundation, and that just doesn't work. And so, chemistry is something that can come and go. You can build it, you can create it, you can destroy it. And so the best way to look at it is like sports teams. Put some players together who don't know each other and they can learn to have chemistry. At work, you can have team building exercises to learn to have chemistry. Chemistry is simply learning how to get along with each other or learning how to work with each other. Because sometimes people can have chemistry as far as they can work together, but they don't get along. They don't really like each other. You know, again, using sports teams, some of those guys have great chemistry on the court, but would never hang out with each other outside of the team sport. So chemistry does not cut to the core of people and true connection. Connection is something that you cannot create or nor can you destroy. It's either there or it's not. And so with connection, it's much more of a rare occurrence to meet someone that you have a connection with. But you can have chemistry with tons of people. And this is just something that's hitting me right now. For those who are believers, do you really like, to me, God is not going to give you, if chemistry was the key, why would he make it such a common occurrence with everyone? Because that would be confusing. Because I could literally line up 100 women and have chemistry with 50 of them or more. How am I going to know which one I'm really supposed to align with if I'm just using chemistry? But connection, you're lucky if you can say you have connection with more than one person. You know, most individuals who have experienced it will say it happened once in their life. Again, it's a rarity. And it's arguable if it even was a second time, but let's just give that consideration 2 times, maybe max. All right. So to me, that is a greater indicator of the person we're supposed to be with, and also a stronger foundation, because with that connection again is to the core. It's we can be ourselves with each other. We can talk to each other. We enjoy each other's presence. There's just so much more to it. And I believe it's an occurrence within the spirit. It's my spirit recognizing its match. You know, it's something that's deeper going on, whereas chemistry is very surface driven. And you got to go past that if you really want to make sure this is for you.
And I think that we live in a world now, I think, where there's so many people that are looking for instant gratification and looking for these, or they make these impulsive decisions. And especially when it comes to dating, that they're looking to date just to date. So they'll just go out and they'll meet somebody. And even though in their heart or in their gut, they know it's not going anywhere, they just have a void, or they're feeling insecure because they're single. And they're like, well, I'm just going to hang out with them because we get along and I enjoy their company, and just see where it goes, even though you know it's not going anywhere because you just don't feel it with them. Maybe you don't even have a lot in common. And then you just waste a lot of time. And then I think it just prolongs the inevitable of it not working out. Maybe you end up creating some more wounds that you need to heal. And now you're just, pushing yourself further and further away from actually meeting somebody that you can spend the rest of your life with. And I think we've lost the ability to practice patience, where it's better to be intentionally single, I think, and do the work and heal yourself and work on your business and do other things, than it is to be with the wrong person and you feel a lot more alone with the wrong person, or even around like a friend group that you shouldn't be surrounding yourself with. So what are some, like, why do you think, other than lack of healing, do you think that people stay in relationships or date the same person a lot longer than they should? Because you hear it a lot where people, they were married and they got divorced and they knew that they shouldn't have been married like super early on in the relationship.
Um, it's well. Let me, before I answer that, let me say this, because as you were talking, I do think that you hit it on the head when you said we've lost the ability to be patient.
Yeah.
And so it's crazy because you could speak to an 18-year-old and they swear they're running out of time to find love. You speak to a 24-year-old, they feel like they're running out of time. You speak to 20, doesn't matter what age the person is at, they all feel like time is running out to find love. And I think what happens, and this is the reason why people hold on to chemistry, is because it's easier to find it. So basically, it eliminates the need to be as patient. I can go out in a week and find someone I have some chemistry with. That gives me more hope. But if I have to wait for connection, Lord have mercy, how long will I be waiting? You know? And I think that innately people understand that that deeper thing takes more time and they don't want to wait. So they need something else to validate holding on to individuals that aren't best for them. And chemistry is one of those things. The other reason, though, now to answer the question specifically as far as why people stay in these relationships, again, fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of they don't feel like they can find anything better. You know, there's been a lot of situations where people were in toxic. So let's put it this way. Let's say, woman or man, you just came out of a relationship where your partner was physically abusive. All right. Completely mistreated you, super duper toxic. Now you meet somebody new and they treat you really well, even though it's still not what it needs to be. And you're still not really completely happy, but there's such an upgrade from the last person you dealt with. And that's if that's all you knew, especially if you've been in multiple abusive relationships, someone who's at least not putting their hands on you, even if they're a little verbally abusive, you'll be like, okay, you know what? This is the best I've ever had. Can I really risk walking away from this thinking I'm going to actually get better? They don't believe better exists. So that tricks them into thinking I should hold on to this. And this is why you have those situations where the person will say, you'll never find anything better than me, you know? And the person really believes that. Like, dang, maybe this is really it. And maybe I should just be happy that I can even get this person. Not to mention, forget it could be the perception of the upgrade from what they've already experienced in their own relationships, or it can also be an upgrade from what they saw their parents go through.
Right.
So I've seen people, and more specifically in this specific example in my head, I've seen a woman validate the relationship she was with, the person she was with, even though it was an unhealthy relationship, because he was better than her father was to her mother. You know, so her father used to be extremely abusive to her mother. This guy wasn't physically abusive, but it was still a very toxic relationship. But she said, well, mom, you know, my mother had it way worse than this. So I should be grateful for what I have, you know? Right. So there's a lot of just unhealthy perspectives created from these experiences that contribute to people holding on to individuals they shouldn't be holding on to. I also think peer pressure. Right. You know, friends and family, well, why don't you find somebody? When are you going to have kids? Blah, 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 blah. This pushes a lot of people into holding on to someone that isn't for them. Sexual relationships as well, or just having sex with someone creates that soul tie, creates that attachment to individuals that then, again, people start overlooking the red flags because they don't want to let go of that specific benefit. And for some women, it might be on the reverse. It might be if he's paying all her bills or something. I've had situations where women were with abusive men, but did not know how to walk away because he was financially securing them. And so they sucked it up and dealt with it, even though they shouldn't have. So there's just so many different things that play into it. But I would say fear of being alone and the fear of not thinking you can find better are probably two of the biggest ones pushing that issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really true, because I don't know, I might be butchering the phrase, but somebody once told me that you marry your unhealed baggage. So I think a lot of people, if they're used to growing up in a toxic environment, or they've been with toxic people in their past, or the relationship dynamic hasn't been healthy, like that's going to be their new sense of normal, and they're going to just accept that as being okay because they feel in their mind that that's okay based on their prior experience, which is why I believe like the whole healing part is so important, because once you begin to address what needs to be healed, you can gain some understanding of what you're holding on to or what's going on in your past, so that you don't have to necessarily always take it forward with you into the next relationship. So
Absolutely.
you hear a lot about the honeymoon phase, and you hear a lot that like once that wears off, it can kind of make or break a relationship, I guess, because then you start to really see who that person really is. You're not maybe as excited all the time to see them. So, like, what are some things that people can do, not necessarily to prolong the honeymoon phase, but to like once they get through that period of excitement, to continue to build authentic connection to still be attracted to their partner?
I think that what you can do is you gotta not let the honeymoon phase blind you from digging deeper into your partner and into the relationship.
Mm.
So I think what happens is in the honeymoon phase, so let's say you meet somebody, you're highly attracted to them, you guys have great chemistry. Everything is so great on the surface that now you don't want to ask the tough questions. You don't want to really dig into understanding who they are, because you're just caught up in trying to enjoy the moment, enjoy the wave of the hype that's going on right now. But I think that if you simply dig deeper at that time, you would either snap out of the honeymoon phase a lot faster, because you would then see, oh, wait a minute, this isn't what I thought it was. Me and this person are not on the same page, they're not for me. Or it would actually strengthen the honeymoon phase, because now as I continue to dig deeper and I'm seeing, holy, this is real. This is really it. There's a connection here. We're on the same page. Now we can now work on prolonging it. But I think also prolonging it also stems from recognizing why it's even here.
Mm.
Meaning, okay, if we're going through a honeymoon phase because we are having long conversations, if we're going through the honeymoon phase because we're going out on dates and enjoying ourselves, if we're having the honeymoon phase because we're making sure we're looking our best for each other, okay, well, to keep it going, we got to keep doing those things. I think what happens for a lot of people is they get past the honeymoon phase, they get the relationship, and now they're like, oh, okay, I don't have to impress you anymore. I don't have to look as good anymore. I don't need to be on the phone with you as long anymore. I don't need to go out and take you on dates as often anymore. So naturally, the phase disappears, and now we get into this complacency, which now can create resentment, create unhappiness, and cause all kinds of other issues. So I think we got to dig deeper while in it to really understand who we're dealing with. And then we have to identify what are the things that we're enjoying so much right now. And again, be intentional of doing those things consistently moving forward.
What are a few things that somebody needs to do or somebody can do so that they can get to know themselves and have successful romantic
I
relationships?
think it starts with knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are, particularly when it comes to being in a romantic relationship. So, for example, if you're someone who gets very anxious, or you tend to get, avoidant, or you're someone who fears closeness, or you're someone who really craves closeness because you didn't have a good relationship with dad growing up, you have a lot of abandonment stuff, or with mom growing up, you have a lot of abandonment stuff. So I think it's really about understanding what it is that you've been through and the ways in which what you've been through come out or have historically come out when you've been in a romantic relationship. What are the things that the choices that you've made, the behaviors that you've had, the patterns that you've had that haven't served you? And so understanding yourself is first having the awareness of the patterns that you have that have not served you, but it's also understanding the ways in which you really thrive in a relationship, or you thrive as a partner, or you are a great partner. So I think it begins with that, because look, we are all humans trying to do the best that we can, and we will all act out in our relationships from time to time, and we'll have our little adult temper tantrums from time to time. And that's just sort of the way it goes. And none of us want to be left. None of us want to be rejected. None of us want to be abandoned. So we're all in the same predicament. But understanding and knowing what your patterns are while having a commitment to change and break those patterns and the ways in which you need to do that, whether it's therapy, whether it's coaching, whether it's reading books, whether it's the retreat, whatever it is. And then also knowing what it is that you want and need. If you've had a really rough go in life, you might need something in a partner that you wouldn't necessarily romanticize or think of right away. You might need a certain degree of safety and security in a relationship. So I'll start with that, see where that takes us.
So where do you think that ranks in the list of priorities? Because we hear a lot that obviously physical attraction plays a certain role. Obviously having the same values, the same beliefs, the same goals, like wanting the same thing in the context of a relationship is super important. Where does the importance of being with somebody who understands your past traumas, understands your past patterns, understands like where you're at from a relational standpoint, like where does that rank on the hierarchy of relationship needs?
Well, I think it depends on the kind of relationship that you want. So if you want a committed long-term relationship, if you're looking for just having an adventure and an affair with someone, none of it really matters except for chemistry and attraction. But if you actually want a relationship that's committed, then I think it's very important that you understand each other's past and traumas. It's not a pass. You don't get a hall pass for treating someone badly or for behaving badly in a relationship because you've been through trauma. But I think that there should be transparent conversations about, look, this is what I went through. This is what I struggle with. This is what I'm working on. I'm committed to really owning my part when I mess up. And when I mess up, please let me know and hold me accountable. That's next level. And that's not what a lot of people do, but it is really next level. We all come to a relationship with baggage. We just do. We all have our stuff. We all have our flaws. We are all dealing with something. And to expect that you're going to meet someone who's going to be the representation of who you believed your parent should have been, which is flawless and perfect and a protector and a healer and a lover and all of, like a loved one, and all of that. Guess what? You're in for a rude awakening. You are a flawed individual. You're going to meet another flawed individual. It's really just a matter of, well, first of all, some people are more flawed than others, and that's just the reality. They just are. If you're someone who works on yourself and you have a value where self-awareness is important to you, and you meet someone and they're just treating people a certain way and they have no self-awareness, that's going to be a problem. So I think it's pretty high up. You should know what you all come to the table with so that you can decide if it's right for you.
This is a good opportunity to segue into something else I wanted to chat with you about. It's like where do you draw the line where, there's certain people that they'll continue to just heal every single day for months and years and even decades, and they're constantly working on themselves. They're constantly like looking into their past just to see like what was it about that caused something today. And I think that there's obviously some level of importance to that, but like where do you draw a line to know that becomes like to a certain point like unhealthy, and that maybe you should, take that next step into maybe trying to work through, develop new healthy relationship patterns with a potential new partner?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it's basically falls under the umbrella of analysis paralysis. You're constantly working on yourself. You're constantly trying to do better. That is actually part of a pattern that's very consistent with perfectionism. And it's also very consistent with feeling like not enough. It's like you're trying to figure out why you maybe, for example, tolerated something or repeatedly tolerated bad behavior from partners. And so now you're like stuck in this healing process because it's fear. You're so afraid. You don't trust yourself. I mean, that's ultimately what happens, is that people get stuck in a pattern of perfectionism, which is just the same programming that they are trying to heal themselves of, paradoxically, which tells them, I have to be 100% healed to be ready for a relationship. And then the second part is this thing that happens to us where we don't trust ourselves. And so we're so afraid to put ourselves out there because we don't trust ourselves. It's hard to say, because for everyone it's different, but there's sort of, let's just say you're someone who's had a string of relationships that not only didn't last, but were painful or unhealthy, or you're noticing a pattern. And then that person has this sort of aha moment where they say to themselves, wow, the common denominator is me. I'm the problem. So I have to work on myself. And so maybe that person hires a therapist. Maybe they hire a coach. Maybe they do a bunch of online courses. Maybe they begin a meditation practice or hire a meditation teacher. Maybe it's all of the above, right? Depending on their resources. So they start to do that, because what has happened is that what they are able to acknowledge is that they are not connected to themselves. They've lost themselves in these relationships. And so they feel very fragmented. There's a void inside that's vast that they're looking into. So they say, okay, I need to figure out how to fill this void myself, right? So I'm going to go down this path to try to rediscover myself, capital S, like the self that lives inside of me. And so you're trying to reclaim yourself. You're trying to reclaim your power, find yourself. And then we get to a point where, and this is sort of phase 2, where it's like, okay, now it's time to lose yourself again. And it doesn't mean lose yourself in the way that you did in the beginning, or in the past, I should say. But you have to then now step out of yourself, join, another person, and learn, further your healing through practice. Because there's only so much studying we can do. At some point, we actually have to put things into practice, and we have to face our fears of being hurt again. We have to face our fears of not being enough. We have to face our fears of not losing ourselves, because it's how we respond to these fears while we're in a relationship that is reflective of the growth and of the progress. And so people get very, very trapped in the healing phase because they're terrified. I mean, if you peel away the onion far enough, what you will find is just the same fear that's been motivating them all along, which has been the fear of not being enough and the fear that they just won't be loved. So where is that line? It really depends on the person. It depends on how dysfunctional they are and have been, how much pain they've caused to themselves and to others. So I can't say that it's, where I would draw. There are some people I work with, and they think they get out of a relationship and they're like, I have to work on myself. And I say, no, you actually have to jump right back into another relationship. There are some people I say that to. Most people say, yes, you need a timeout and you need to work on yourself. But there's this theme in the current pop psychology zeitgeist right now that's saying you have to take all this time to work on yourself. For some people, working on themselves is getting in another relationship and getting into another relationship quickly, because their pattern is to mourn over someone who's not worth mourning over for years. And that's their pattern. They get stuck in that. So it's so case dependent.
We live in a world where it's two extremes, right? You have the one side that's like, there's people that just constantly jump from relationship to relationship to relationship to relationship, which is super unhealthy at times, right? Except for like the cases that you just explained.
Well, it's never a good idea to just jump and jump and jump without any self-reflection. You have to have some self-reflection. It's just that it doesn't have to be years.
And then there's the other side, though, that they're just constantly healing. I got to heal. I got to wait till I'm like got this perfect my perfect healing journey complete before I jump into another relationship. And we're going to talk about self-trust and how to rebuild trust with yourself, because I think that's an important topic. But I want to kind of put a bow on what we were just discussing, in that let's just say that somebody has put themselves out there in the dating world again. They've met somebody that they have a lot in common with, that they're attracted to, that they could potentially see a relationship with. It can be challenging, I think, for a lot of people to have difficult conversations with somebody they really don't know that well, and they have this fear of rejection and getting hurt. Like, how do you guide your clients to open up and share about their past, relationship patterns and traumas and insecurities in a way that can, allow them to move that relationship forward?
I don't believe in, telling someone you just met everything about your past right off the bat. Usually when people do that, that's coming from a place of fear and insecurity. But I think that as you get to know someone and as things are progressing, you share a little bit more about yourself. I advise the people who I work with to be really transparent But the first step is being comfortable with your past. You have to be comfortable enough with your past to be able to share it. And what I mean by that, it's not like you want to go back to the past, but you accept the fact this is part of what I've been through. This is part of what I struggle with. And this is it. This is what I struggle with. And I think it's a lovely conversation to have. And I think that I would love people to I encourage people to have more of those types of conversations with each other. The thing that I see, though, and this might steer the conversation in a particular direction, but people are having these intimate conversations with a date. And then that person will come to me with the expectation that now they're in a relationship with this person because they've had these sort of open conversations. And it's interesting, there are certain people who can go there and have those conversations, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be in a relationship with them. So it's twofold. One is, I wouldn't want to be, and nor would I advise anyone who I'm working with to embark on, commit to, and invest in a relationship with someone who does not accept you for who you are. And that includes the struggles that you've been through. So I'm all for having these conversations. It just doesn't have to be date one. Like the first couple of dates builds rapport. See if you have a good time together. See if you are on the same page in terms of what it is that you like to do and what you want in life. It doesn't have to be constantly talking about, trauma. But yes, it's important to bring it up.
Right. And so taking it like one step further, I would imagine that having these hard conversations, having deep, meaningful chats with somebody that you're interested in can help build some level of emotional connection. And I think oftentimes connection and chemistry get confused and mixed up, and I think they're pretty different. So in your opinion, like how does somebody know they actually have true emotional connection and it's not just chemistry?
Chemistry is important. But if you're someone who's always had chemistry with people who are bad for you, then chemistry is extremely unreliable. So it depends on the person. I think that chemistry that builds over time is really what you want to have happen. Meaning like there's chemistry, there's rapport, there's some attraction when you first meet. And then every date that you have after that, every time that you hang out, there's even more, because if the chemistry can build when you're finding that there is mental connection, intellectual connection, emotional connection, and then you're finding like that chemistry, that attraction builds as a result of all those other things coming into place. That's the goal. That's really, really what you want. That doesn't mean you have to have some sort of, physical attraction. That doesn't mean that you're on a date with someone who you find really like not attractive at all. And then you're like, okay, well, we get along, so now I'm attracted. No, but that you want it to build over time versus, because what happens is this, when the chemistry is so overpowering, whether we can admit to this or not, this is what happens every single time. They can be saying things that really don't align with what it is that you really like. They could be saying things that you might not even like at all, but you excuse it because the chemistry is so strong. And that's where you're like, oh, we don't share this really important value. It's okay. So you start justifying it. Someone recently wrote into me saying, I have a zero tolerance for drugs and alcohol. I grew up in an alcoholic family and I don't have that in my life. I don't want that in a partnership. Well, she's dating someone who smokes weed every day, all day, because we have a really strong connection, and everyone's telling me, well, weed's not such a big deal and it's basically legal and blah, blah. So it's amazing how in one sentence, I have a zero tolerance for drugs, and in the exact same sentences, I'm starting to see someone who smokes weed every day, all day long.
I want to touch on that really quick because this was something that came in from one of the questions from the audience when I mentioned I was talking to you, and this is a great time to talk about it, is like, how do we sometimes separate our heads from our hearts? Because I think what you're describing is a perfect example. Like this person's head is like, no, 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 no. But once they start to build some chemistry, the heart is like, yes, 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 yes. So using that as a great example, like how can somebody separate their head from their heart?
This is the great conundrum, because love is an irrational emotion. It's completely irrational. And, when I'm working with people who love someone who's absolutely terrible for them, it's like, on the one hand, you want to shake them out of it, but on the other hand, you have to have some compassion, because once you love someone, it's very, very hard. So this is about getting wiser. It's about learning. So that's why I think that values and lifestyle and things like that should be discussed very early on, which is like, because your heart, you can separate your heart from chemistry. You can be really attracted to someone, but that's not your heart. After date one, you don't love someone after date one. You could be wildly attracted to them, which could be a problem for a lot of people. But talk about that stuff very early on. First date, I have a zero tolerance for drugs. Do you engage? And someone might lie, and you never know. People can really lie and say, oh yeah, I don't do drugs and whatever. But, I think it's about knowing what your deal breakers are and being very, very loyal to them. And I'm not going to lie, it takes a lot of mental strength, but it also means like, look, we're going to learn the hard way. But at some point, I don't think people should have a laundry list of things that they don't want. I think that they should have a few things that are really, really important to them and a longer list of things that they're willing to tolerate, honestly, because that's just the reality. But those few things that you list that you really, really need or you will not tolerate, they have to be no matter what. They have to be no matter what.
And I think a lot of this comes back to feeling secure, having a high level of self awareness, self worth, self trust. And I know at the beginning we touched on like how to get to know yourself as far as where you stand with relationships. I think this is a good time to kind of dive into like what are some things that somebody can do to practice self-trust within themselves, to rebuild their sense of self-worth, so that when they're in situations like this, it gives them a better chance to walk away instead of being in a position where they're like feeling insecure and they're using love or relationship to fill that void.
So I'll give you a few things that they can do. Number one, get out of your head and go do something. Help someone. Put your energy into your community. Put your energy into your work. Put your energy into something outside of yourself. So contribute in some way. I think that is the fastest way to get out of your head. It is a really fast way to build self-esteem. It's also a way to build self-confidence, trust in yourself, all of that. So get out of the analysis paralysis. Stop thinking, because just to circle back, the constant working on yourself is the constant obsession of oneself. And that's not a diss. I'm not putting anyone down. I've been in that too, but we have to watch it. We have to watch being constantly obsessed with ourselves, because really the greatest form of personal development is giving to something or someone outside of yourself. And that is just the bottom line. It's a fact. And then another thing that you can do is meditate. I think meditation is one of the most powerful practices to connecting to the part of yourself that is not scared, to the part of yourself that is not fearful, to the part of yourself that's not feeling worthless. When you meditate, and this doesn't happen overnight. This really is something you have to practice. It's the same thing. Like if you want to transform your body, lifting weights one day is not going to do it. Like it has to be consistent, but you learn to connect to the wiser part of yourself, that sort of primordial wisdom that resides in every single one of us beneath the ego. So that's another way. For some people, because I really don't believe there's one size fits all, except for, giving outside of yourself and meditation. But some people, they need to spend more time with friends. They need to build their community a little bit more. Some people, they need to spend more time in nature. Some people need to make up with their parents. Some people need to reconnect with their sibling. Some people need to spend some time alone. So I really try to advise that specifically for the individual. But yeah, those are some things to start right away.
It's such great points, because it's so important to not fall into that trap of either consistently being in that healing journey and not really, putting yourself out there to co-regulate with other people, and then also being on the other side where, you're not building your self-esteem at all and you're not doing any kind of work and you're just kind of bouncing from relationship to relationship and using love and relationships to fill a void. I want to talk about some keys to a healthy relationship and some that often get overlooked. So obviously, like communication, dealing with conflict, having common beliefs, like all those things I would imagine that most people understand are very important for a relationship to succeed. One of the things I've heard you talk about is the importance to be able to co-regulate with one another and the importance of that. So talk about why it's so important and why that's different than being codependent, and what are some ways that people who are in relationships can learn to co-regulate.
You can't co-regulate with someone who's always blaming or they're always blaming you. You can only co-regulate with someone who you feel safe with. So I think that the number one key to a healthy relationship is that both people feel safe with one another, emotionally and obviously physically. Part of what provides that safety to each other is having that open communication, but also having this mindset, if you will, or this commitment to, when you're in pain, I listen. Now, that doesn't mean I listen every time you're just complaining to me about me. But when you are hurt, I listen, whether it's hurt about me, whether it's hurt about something that someone else said to you. And so co-regulating is basically, a lot of it is how you deal with conflict. It's basically like you see your partner is dysregulated, their nervous system is a bit off for whatever reason, and you are able to help them find their breath again, be a steady force for them in that moment, a steady presence for them in that moment. Sometimes it means co-regulation, sometimes means, oh, I need to get my partner out of their head, so I'm going to make them laugh. Right? It doesn't always have to be so serious. I'm going to be goofy with them. What I'm about to say, I am admitting is really, really hard. But if we can practice when two people, when they're completely dysregulated and blaming each other, right? That's basically a fight. Two people dysregulating, blaming each other. What's a toxic relationship? That's the norm of the relationship, basically. When they're doing that, it's almost like they're unconsciously competing for who's the most dysregulated in that moment. It just takes one person, one of them, to step out and be like, okay, let's calm down now. Let's bring this back to earth. And so that's really what co-regulation is. It's being able to be aware of your partner's nervous system when their nervous system is off, to be aware of their energy, to then not be reactive or reacting constantly to their energy, but instead be like, I don't have to react to their energy. I can actually be the opposite of their energy right now and help them soothe and calm down. This is like next level relationship skills, but it's very, very important. I recently had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a very, very, very self-aware individual, meditator, coach, all of that. And she says, and she's going through a little bit of a rough patch with her husband, but they're very committed to one another. But she said, I realized I had this breakthrough where like, part of our problem is that like, if he's reactive to something, I'm just taking it personally. I'm reacting to his reaction constantly. Instead, I could soothe him in that moment. I could tell him, babe, it's no big deal. It's all good. I hear you. And when I do that, it's like he immediately relaxes. Then he becomes the man who I always wanted him to be. So that is a really great example of what I'm trying to say and what co-regulation is.
Like getting into the topic of seduction and being able to read people. I mean, because a lot of people now, they're single and they're trying to, start dating, getting into a relationship. And sometimes people can have a hard time actually reading people. Like people are putting their best reputation, their best foot forward when they're meeting somebody else. What are a few things somebody can do to be able to read somebody that they're maybe out with or they're becoming friends with, to know that they're actually true to who they say they are?
Everything depends on the circumstance, the individual you're dealing with. So it's a little bit faults to generalize too much here, but the basic thing is in the laws of human nature, I have a chapter on nonverbal communication. And it's really, in essence, the subject of The Art of Seduction, my second book. When that book came out, I told people, I said that seduction is a language, but it's not really a language of words. It's a language of gesture. It's a language of the senses, of smells, of the sound of a person's voice, of things about them physically that get under your skin. It's a language of gestures and behavior. And your behavior, what you do, how you carry yourself, your level of confidence, it's nothing you say, but people read it, right? Because we don't realize it, but 95% of human communication, I'm just throwing a number out there, but it's somewhere in that vicinity, is nonverbal, but we don't realize it, right? You're actually, every day of your life, when you're interacting with people at the office or in your home, unconsciously or subconsciously, you're paying attention to their tone of voice, the look in their eyes, their posture, and the simple gestures that they're doing, like whether they're late, how messy their room is, etc. These details, you're reading them, okay? The main problem that you have in life is you have this antenna built into your head, like an insect's antenna, that detect what people are really thinking, whether they really like you, whether they really think that your ideas are great. You don't know how to use that antenna, right? Because you're not able to get outside of yourself. You're so damn self absorbed. You're always thinking about yourself. So you're on a date. I'm a man, so I'm going to put myself naturally in the position of a man meeting a woman or something. It's the first time, and you're thinking, does she like me? Am I saying the right things? How's she responding to me? She should really like me, blah, 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 blah. You're thinking about yourself. You're so inside of yourself that you're actually not seeing the fact that she's not responding to you at all, that her body language shows that she's disconnecting from you. Whereas you have the power if you cut off, there's a little knob there and you turn off the interior monologue. Click, it's off. You're inside of her. You're thinking inside of her world, her mind. You're paying her attention. She's going to connect to you, and the body language will shift. They've noticed things like mirroring, so that when people are connecting and clicking, if you cross your legs, the other person will cross their legs. If you touch your hair, the other person will touch. That's a sign that they're unconsciously connecting to you in some way, right? So, you have to be attuned to that. You have to click off that interior monologue, that me that's constantly playing throughout your brain. Get inside them, the other world, and then realize that your attention to them, your focus on them, your ability to think what they're thinking is the most seductive power in the world. No man or woman on the planet can resist it because we're all starving for attention and recognition. And when someone has the antenna and it's doing the little things that an antenna do, and you're focused on them and you're looking at them and you're in their world, I never get that from anybody else. I never get that from my family, it's like a drug, it's addictive, right? You have the power to do that. Cut off the self-absorption, get inside their world and focus on them, and they're going to fall under your spell. So to me, and it's hard in this world today because people have lost that skill. It's your damn dating apps that have destroyed socializing, right? Instead of having to actually go out in the world and actually put your reputation on the line in a bar or a cafe and literally seduce your way and interest the other person, you just go flipping through a screen, accept, reject, accept, reject. What crap? You're not building any social skills. I'm sorry. And you're going to pay for it later in life when you don't know how to pay attention to people and through your own words and your own body language connect to them. You're depending on technology for everything. Get rid of that nasty habit and learn how to actually develop social skills in a seduction in any kind of situation. So that's enough of my rant on that.
You're right. It's hard these days, right? Because people are so used to using technology to meet people and to connect with people, and there's no app to teach you how to build social skills in a real life setting. Like, I mean, obviously there's tips, there's tricks, but the only way to do it is to actually get into the arena and actually meet people and start talking to people. And along those lines, like once you meet somebody and you're out with them and paying attention to them, obviously you said is super important, and getting into their mind, what are some ways, you guys using this same guy as an example, like how can this guy begin to understand if this person that he's out with is actually somebody that could be a potential match or connection for him?
I didn't quite answer your question before because you were saying, how can you tell whether someone is actually being who they are, whether they're
Yeah, yeah,
lying
yeah.
to you, whether they're deceiving? And that's kind of backing up to what we were just talking about, where on a screen on your phone with your dating app, whatever it is, you can't really tell, even though there might be a recording of them. People are master actors. They're good at deceiving, right? And when they're on that app or they're recording themselves, they're putting their best foot forward. They're looking their best, they're controlling what they say. You have no idea who they are. And the ability to judge people who are lying, who are deceiving, it can only be developed in person. You're never going to get it through Tinder or whatever app you're using, right? Because there's no filter on that for it. You have to use your eyes, you have to use your own physical intelligence. And in the laws of human nature, I talk about there are people who've written brilliant books about decoding body language, and they go into more detail than I do. So you should definitely read their books. But you look at their eyes, and when people are genuinely happy or excited or interested in you, there's a difference in the way the eyes focus and the way the whole face is. So you'll notice that somebody's looking at you, right? And it's deceptive. Do you think they're interested? But the rest of their face doesn't seem very excited or very interested. These kind of discrepancies are very revealing, and they show that they're trying to actually pretend that they're interested in you through a fake smile or through eyes that kind of look like they're attending. But when somebody's really interested or really excited or really likes you, they don't control those things. The whole face lights up. The mouth, when you're really interested in somebody, this is a fake smile. There's a tenseness to it, right? But when you're really laughing or smiling, the whole face is animated and you know it. You can feel it. You're just not paying attention. You're being stupid. You're not looking. You're not seeing that they're actually not that interested in you, that their eyes are showing one thing, but the mouth is showing something else. Or they actually are responding to you because their whole face is responding to you, but you're not paying attention. Their posture towards you, right? Are they, if you're standing, in a party, are they square on you? Are they looking at you straight? Or are they looking at you while their body is kind of positioned to a side? And then they're kind of looking over at other people. They're a bit distracted. They're not into you at all. The tone of voice is a total language that you have to learn to pay attention to. Actors whose whole life is acting learn how to control the facial muscles to kind of give a certain impression. Training the voice to give impressions is really hard. So when people are trying to fake it, they can't fake their voice, right? An excited person, a person who's interested in you, it has a certain lilt to it. It has a certain rhythm, a cadence that reveals itself. And when they're not interested in you, the senses are short or whatever. There's a certain otherness to it that you're not detecting. So pay attention to all these things and then pay attention to the gestures and the behavior. Okay. People who are chronically late, it's your third date and the third time they're late, don't excuse that and go, well, they're a busy person, blah, blah, blah. Your antenna should be going, this person has a flaw. I'm not interested in them. They're late now. They're going to always be late. They're not considerate. They're not polite. They're only thinking about themselves. Read their behavior. When it comes time for giving gifts, a common mistake that people will make is to give the gift that's most expensive, some generic thing that they think is going to impress you. But if somebody gives you a gift in which it's clear that they've been thinking about you, they're thinking about something you said, about who you are as an individual, about something about your own personality, a thoughtful gift, that is a thoughtful person. That's a gold. That's like gold. They're going to be thoughtful for 10 years down the line. That's somebody you can marry, you can live with, right? Pay attention to the little things, the gestures, the gifts, whether they're late, whether they're thoughtful, whether they're considerate, whether they're paying attention to you, the tone of voice. It's a language. Learn the language, or no app in the world will ever help you.